If you're holding power and you're representing to others that power looks like the alpha aggression towards others, you're inviting this upon yourself. This is foolish. It's going to create a repetitive cycle. We're in that right now in the world. This is Machiavellianism played out in the world.
Men are not toxic. Men are the answer. Welcome to the Masculation podcast. A big welcome back to Jordan Mockingbird, my first repeat guest here on the Remasculation podcast. And it's no surprise that it's you, brother. We have been hard at work this last year, coming up on our 1-year anniversary, one might say, on New Year's Eve when we met here in Austin, Texas. I had just gotten here New Year's 2024. And what a year it has been for both of us individually, for our partnership, the work that we've been doing, your continued support of my work through the ritual tobacco and the ceremonies that you hold, and the crossover that we have in the realm of men's work, in the realm of Tantra, and the Tantra of plants even that we're going to talk about today. But the main theme that we're going to fold in right out of the gate here is this trope that I think we're seeing in men's work, this very interesting thing that is happening that we've been chatting a bit about, the return of the king. And as you just pointed out here before we jumped on, the auspiciousness of J.R.R. Tolkien's third book in the trilogy, of what it means, the coming home and the returning of this archetype to not just the lexicon of our culture, but really into what we see at the tip of the spear in men's work, both in its exalted form and also as sort of this parroting of I'm a king, and look at all of the things, the trappings that come with it on both sides. So we're going to talk about this idea in its brilliance. We're going to talk about it in its shadow. But yeah, one of these beautiful realms of carryover that you and I have is this deep work in the men's space. And I often have people ask me this question of what is men's work? Well, it's the work that men do together, separate from women, to become, as I see it, the men we were born to be, the best men that we can possibly be, so that we can actually show up to our women in the best way possible. In the work that I do in the King's Code with Rob Montgomery, Mark Boughton, and Boughton, excuse me, Mark. God, I'm going to pronounce your name correctly, I swear to God. This work that we do, this impetus towards what it means to step into that particular energy by bringing the other archetypes online, by bringing the warrior, the lover, the magician into balance so that the king quality can emerge. But what it is that we're looking to do in this work of helping men live into the potential that they're kind of drowning in, and the way our culture is so fixated on this cult, all of the different potential that we have, the analysis paralysis that I think so many men get trapped in their drive towards finding their purpose, finding their meaning, all these things. This is the work that we focus on in the King's Code, of helping men arrive at that place so that we can then show up to the feminine. But that's stepping into our own king, creating our own kingdom, what these things mean. And they don't necessarily have to be a literal, I have a castle or a home or a this or a that, though those are sort of the common threads or representations that we have and use in our culture. So I'm curious to pitch it over to you, brother, because I know you've been doing quite a bit of men's work this year. You've been able to see a lot of what's happening in the men's work space in regards to the emergence of this archetype, the fixation on, let's say, the tip of the hierarchy, the point of the hierarchy, how that is a beautiful thing to aspire to, and how it also has its shadow and the cult of personalities that can emerge and have, and we've all been a part of those organizations. So how is it landing for you, brother? Welcome back to the show. Love to just kick it off with you.
Thanks for having me, brother. It's good to be here with you. As you were speaking, I was really starting to reflect on Tolkien's myth and this aspect of his myth, which he concludes as, it's the third book of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, The Return of the King. So I don't think we were riffing on Tolkien when we were speaking about Return of the King earlier, the Return of the King archetype in culture. Yeah. But I've studied Tolkien's work in depth. It's been a huge influence on me as an artist. And Tolkien has this character of Aragorn, who is essentially a lost heir of a broken line of kings that is said to be the true kings of men. And in an ancient time, one of Aragorn's forefathers essentially fell to a lust for power. And this caused the land of Middle-earth, or the world, to go into disharmony and for the forces of good and evil to get out of balance. And Aragorn has become a ranger. This is the kind of contemporary story we come into. And he's become a lone wolf of sorts, running off in the wilderness and doing these side quests, if you will, helping different people do different things. But he smokes a pipe, he's got this hood on, and he keeps a low profile. And there are some who know who he is as the heir of this ancient lineage and who want him to step back into it, and he refuses for the first 2 books. He's consistently refusing the invitations to step back into kingship. And in the meantime, the kingdom is run by these stewards. And it's essentially a family of men who are intoxicated by a lust for power. And they are false kings. And the story that Tolkien weaves is about the, call it like karmic dissolution of this family that is holding kingship. They should not be there. They don't have the rightful, call it codes, or even the proper intent to hold power. And through their own folly, they fall into disarray. And through destiny, Aragorn is led back to take his rightful place as king, and order is restored to Middle-earth. And it's a medieval, it's a kind of medieval concoction of these old archetypes. Tolkien was a professor of Old and Middle English literature at Oxford. And so, he was taking these great motifs of the British Isles and of Northern Europe and weaving them into this meta-modern tale that seems to still stick and resonate. So one of the pieces that really hits home for me about this idea of the return of the king is moving from ranger, this kind of self-contained, somewhat shadowed version of power, where, call it playing small, or we've hidden ourselves or concealed ourselves in some way in order to exist in the world. We've found a way to conceal ourselves, to be. So we find our kind of peace or our way of being through enshroudment or concealment. And I think part of coming back to what it means to be a king is to cast off any concealments that we have and to stand in our own truth and to stand in our own radiance. And to do that, we have to face these little deaths many times because we conceal ourselves out of fear. We conceal ourselves sometimes out of fear of ourselves, out of fear of our own power, that we might have to take responsibility for our power in ways that we don't know how to or not ready for. So we need to face these small egoic deaths in order to be ready to fully throw off our cloaks, so to speak, and say, okay, this is who I am. I'm here in the world as myself. And it is speaking to a kind of authenticity. And if more men were to live that way, the divine masculine authenticity of what we are as beings, kind of pure, our own purity, if you want to say it like that, our own purity as men, the world would be a different place.
Hallelujah, brother. Wow. I did not know that about Tolkien. I did not know that about the deeper elements of the story. And thank you so much for, I know the work you've done as an artist and a storyteller, and I've had the privilege of reading some of your fiction, which is truly mind-bogglingly brilliant and nuanced and in the same vein. And what a brilliant thing to be considering, this returning of the king and all the different metaphors that Tolkien weaved into the story, the ranging from the call to step back into our kingship, the fallen lineages that we all in a way are from, and the opportunity as men to step back in and reclaim and revivify and repurify all of our lineages back into that orientation towards kingship, which is simply right rulership and proper orientation in the world. What an absolute gift. And you mentioned, the facing of the little deaths. It's like there's the die before you die idea from the Greeks, an pethanis prin pethanis dentha pethanis otan pethanis. If you die before you die, when you die, you will not die. That what I think, again, the esotericness of this story that you're weaving reminds me of the esotericness of the biblical stories when they're not taken literally, when they're taken symbolically as teaching stories. And the idea of being born again, but being born again in this life as the king, rising from the ashes of your own, and Brother Scorpio, you and I both know this well, and that phoenixing out of the ashes that can come. What a remarkable place to begin here in this story that is, well, I guess he was writing it during the First World War, as I recall, right? Or after, when I think he served, right. Tolkien, that is. And weaving these ancient stories from the place where my lineage comes from, where my genetics come from, the British Isles, the Germanic, Northern European roots of these ancient tales. Holy smokes. Chills, man. Just straight up chills. The whole thing is such a beautiful map for what it means to restore integrity to the kingdom. And if every man is doing that, the world has no choice but to change around us. And what a beautiful call to step into for all of us. Every man listening to this, I hope you are receiving the message in the way that I think it's been preserved for us, for those with ears to hear and eyes to see, right? To call this up and start to recognize, wait a second, if I take responsibility for my life and my lineage, as fucked as it might be, what I can start to bring more of back into the world, and that in its essence has to be that king, that right relationship, rather than the corrupt steward that you spoke to so beautifully, the steward that has lost himself in the lust for power because they've lost sight of the true power that cannot be faked, that cannot be bought or sold, but comes from the center of gravity in the spine of a man that has centered on that which he is here to be about, and will orient his whole life to live for, and if necessary to die for. And that type of a man is a man to be reckoned with.
That's right. One of the other pieces of how this character, this protagonist, in a sense, there are a few protagonists in the story, but Aragorn is really the central protagonist of Tolkien's work. And he comes back to it through aiding this fellowship. And this fellowship is going to destroy this ring of power that Aragorn's forefather took, which caused him to fall and become corrupted. It's what broke the line of kings. It was this ring. And part of Aragorn's destiny or work is to aid this fellowship, this community that is traveling to try to destroy this ring and essentially right a great wrong. And it's a multi-species endeavor. So there are like these different races of beings that are collaborating, right, to go and destroy this object, which is causing a great kind of imbalance. And through Aragorn giving everything he has, he throws his life down for it many times, throws himself to the brink of doom. You see this throughout Tolkien's trilogy. He lays down his life in these valiant acts to assist the destruction of this ring, assist this community. And it's not his job to destroy it, it's someone else's. But he isn't playing this assistant role, and the role of the warrior defending the sanctity of this community that is on this great quest to destroy this ring. And through these continual acts of service, he finds his way back to his rightful seat. And I think, it's a beautiful myth. And again, it speaks to so much of the mythic architecture that is in humanity that you find encoded in religion and spirituality and in ancient poems and stories. And one of the pieces that I find most pressing for us to reckon with, we were riffing on this earlier, is how do we hold myth and how do we hold these maps of stories in actualization or in the integration of life and living.
Yes.
And one way we might talk about that, and maybe it's a useful shift or a useful transformation, is to go from maybe Tolkien's story titled in 2025 is not the return of the king, but the return of the divine masculine. Because I think that's what he's pointing to, right? I think that's what the myth is is evoking or
Absolutely.
speaking to, right? So
Yeah.
what is that? What do you think? What's the difference between king, divine, masculine? How are they the same? How are they different?
Well, I wonder, the trappings of the king, right? The singularity of the king. Who's the king? The shadow of that being the sort of quest for power that we saw, and again, so many of the medieval stories, and the war for who becomes the tyrant in a way. Seeking power in that way cannot create anything other than a tyrannical king, because the method through which you ascend is one of myself over others. And so I think it's so interesting. You mentioned this as this mythical teaching story. I also see the Bible and these other texts as not these literal transcriptions of what technically happened, but as these symbolic and psychological teaching stories. And that what I understand the second coming of Christ to be about, not necessarily the singular being, if there even was one, that comes back, but the arising of that energy in all of us. The second coming of Christ being the second coming of that in each one as we ascend into our own greatness. And so what happens when, yes, there will be individual kings, the necessary of each individual arising to his own kingship within himself, but in a way, a bit of the safety net of multiple kings and multiple people being able to come forward. And I think for men, annihilating, or at least not annihilate, I think breaking through the barriers of the cult of comparison and the cult of competition and its shadow elements, because competition is healthy and comparison can be as well if it's done without guilting, shaming, or punishing oneself or others, or descending into the negative facets of judgment. But to be able to, orient towards the multiplicity of and the safety of multiple kings, and my kingship doesn't threaten your kingship. Your kingship actually inspires more of my kingship to come forward. And then certainly there will be necessary negotiations and maybe even some clanging of swords to determine where we're at and what's there. But I think for men whose orientation is towards something greater than themselves as acts of service to something beyond themselves, that seems to me to be the pivot point of what are you seeking to be a king for? What are you seeking leadership for? What's the why behind your ascent to the throne? Are you seeking power? Are you seeking fame? Are you seeking these, as we say in the men's work, the elements of boy psychology, the immature masculine versus the divine masculine? And so, yes, I think you're right, Jordan. I think there is some safety in a remuneration of king maybe as divine masculine in that sense. And I also love the term. I don't want to dispense with the beauty of a hierarchical structure that is in alignment, but can only be in alignment when the subordinate positions are in right relationship and everyone has their place in the realm. And the second in command isn't secretly plotting to assassinate the king because he's jealous, or it's like what the Camelot story I think is about, the right relationship of the realm, or even the translation of what Israel means in Hebrew, those who wrestle with God, those who are seeking to create a perfect kingdom but are doing it imperfectly as men. And it's interesting to be sort of referencing this. Jordan Peterson's new book is obviously We Who Wrestle with God, and a bunch of us from the King's Code tonight are literally about to drive to San Antonio to go see him speak. And arguably his biblical lecture series was one of the most influential moments of my life, that material where he himself was translating the literalness of the biblical stories into a more psychological and symbolic perspective that allowed me to break through into the truth of these archetypal mythological stories that may have some actuality to them, but allowed me to start to see this divine archetype spread out in a way that didn't just organize me in a I want to be the king, or I want to be this, or I want to be that from a more selfish perspective. But how do I ascend to the throne in service of something greater than myself, in service to the realm, in service to my brothers and my sisters? Can I assume that? And I think part of I'm all over the place here a little bit, but when Aragorn is the ranger, the part of him that is hesitant to assume power, I think is actually healthy. There's a healthy element to the ranger who doesn't want to repeat the mistake of his past, of the lineage. And so in the face of what we see in the modern world and so much of what this misnomer of patriarchy, this toxic masculinity thing that is thrown out and around, that I think is done for a good reason, but also does a lot of harm and don't agree with. There's something about that that is stepping out to be seen and to be healed. And the shadow element of the masculine now having more of its divine possibilities coming online for us to actually start to see and witness, because I think so many of us, we just didn't grow up with any models for what the king looks like, what are the divine archetypes, what is a man in right relationship actually look like, actually feel like, how does he speak, how does he go to the gym, how does he publish a paper, how does he fuck his woman, like these elements that we just haven't had or seen, so we almost have lost the belief that they exist.
Yep.
Right? And here again, back to the Tolkien story. So I'll throw it to you, brother.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I mean, there was a few things in what you spoke to there that felt very charged of how we come back to remembrance of what embodying the divine masculine is and looks like and feels like as embodiment, and not just as mythic map, right? That's not good enough. The mythic map is all potentiated. We need to experiment with it, activate it, live it, and put it into life, breath, flesh, right? But one of the main pieces where I feel like we are talking about men and men's work, though this cannot all be done by men and with men. This is something that has to be done also with women, but containing it to what men can do together and why men need to do this together as one part of the equation, as a vital, fundamental part of the equation, is the circle, right? So, you were talking about competition and the shadow of the king, right? And this being one of perhaps the potential wisdom in shifting the terminology towards divine masculine, or towards bridging this idea of kingship through just awareness of what the shadows of this are. And this is vital to the exploration of the archetype, because we do clash swords. And the more you step into power, the more the potential for the clashing of swords becomes alive. And the more others step into power around you, the more imminent you could clash. So as men rise together, how do we maintain peace together? And I think that is part of the core value of men's work, is we rise together, we maintain peace together. And that's counsel, and that's the circle. Yes. Right? And the circle is inherently the feminine side of things, to not sit in the pyramid.
Yeah,
but
the round table, right?
Round table. We level it. And so at the round table, even King Arthur is equal to the other men at the table. And you see that throughout medieval literature. Yes. Even though he remains the king, the drama of medieval literature is him getting the piss taken out of him half the time by his knights. Yes. Because sometimes they're more powerful than him, or banging his wife or whatever. And, I mean, medieval literature is crazy. Yeah. We need the even playing field so that we can sit and speak truth together. And this reveals more nobility than who can fight better on the battlefield. This is peacocking, right? True. And it's like, this can only get you so far. Is it a side of masculinity to be able to show one's or demonstrate one's strength? Yes, it's like a part of the game of reality to be able to play this art of being a man, to dress, to speak, to interact in a way that demonstrates one's elegance and one's sense of personal style. There's like an immense beauty in this. And I do not think that this should ever be eschewed. It should be promoted, and it should be valued, that for men to have personal style. And part of that could be that part of that can create tension. The more you show your personal style in the world, other people may feel inspired and some may feel threatened.
Yes.
This is okay. We need to have spaces where we can sit, level the playing field. You tuck some of your personal style back in, you set it down on the table, and we come to humility together.
That's it.
And
Is
this,
the anti-tyrannical element of the circle, that it levels that playing field. Whether it's, I know that in ancient, I think in Mesopotamia it was, where they had this, where Marduk was the Babylonian god, and that the king was meant to be that god, to be the transmission of that, but that every year they would take he would submit himself to the people. They would strip him naked, walk him through the street, take him outside the gates of the city, and then basically just come in on him with interlocutor, just grilling him on how he had been a good king or a good Marduk and how he'd not been. And so the ability for the king to sit at a table of equals, open himself up to criticism. What an incredible thing to not only be anti-tyrannical, but to inspire the rest of the men with you to really respect your leadership, and to respect that you respect them enough to recognize that we are brothers here, and that the leadership of someone else in the group might be superior for what comes up and arises in the necessity of the moment. And to be able to utilize that technology, that circle technology, the feminine element of leadership in the congressional style, the circle, and what an incredible transmission point that is for, again, what's possible and how we're all able to grow by sharing our truth in the company of other men.
yeah, I've never heard that. I've never heard of that right. But that's an incredible image of, because it's pretty common in many cultures and traditions that the king at the top of the pyramid, like the pharaohs, they're gods, they're embodiments of their gods on earth. They become the bridge between, sky gods and the human earthen realm. But this whole right of taking them outside their domain, stripping them of all of their power and their, really not their power, because to get an entire people screaming at you is to put you in an incredible position of power, but to turn you into the scapegoat, really, it's like to invert it and to turn you into the sacrificial offering. I mean, you're now getting into the Christ mysteries and the mysteries of self-sacrifice and what it means to be at the heart of power. And you're coming back into this idea of you have to be willing to sacrifice everything for the good of all to be able to maintain any kind of leadership.
Yes.
Or righteous leadership, we might say.
Great.
And what is it to become that, right? To go on the journey of becoming integrous and to becoming deserving.
To become deserving of the divine or integrated element of the king. All that is not that has to go. All that is not that has to burn. You want to be, Scarface in your castle of cocaine and women and money and Bugattis and all the different things that are being celebrated right now in our culture as the demarcations of value that represent kingship. Bullshit. And it's a shame, but it's being revealed, I think, in a way. Because again, like you said, I love how you put that, because you are someone that I just personally really love and enjoy your personal style, Jordan. You have when you guys meet Jordan, and you should, because his work with tobacco is life-changing, and sacred trees has been for me. There's such a panache that you bring that is also, in my experience, you dance well with this sort of the egocentrism that is sort of necessary to hold what you have, and also the humility of the parts of you that I feel that have burned, that have actually gone through the necessary humbling to make you very human and accessible, where it was, even though you were holding me through something, there was immediately an easy brotherhood there. There was immediately an easy, I see you, brother, on the path here. And so there's something to that that's really beautiful as well, and your ability to hold that visibility in the field without undercutting others through it, or using it to weaponize or bring it over anyone. Yeah, there's a skill and a gift and an edge to that I think is really important, as we also start to look at just the bullshit of, well, if you're only oriented towards external representations of value, if you living in a castle and having a private military and a harem of women, does that make you a king? I mean, I suppose by some standard, but those kings in the stories are never happy. They're never fulfilled. They're never at rest. And how can they be? Because they have that sword of Damocles hanging over their head, the inevitability of what they feel is coming for them, which is the comeuppance of their abuse of power, and the restlessness of you can never sleep, you can never rest easy, because how can you actually trust the people around you if you've set yourself up as the tyrant, if you've set yourself up as the supreme leader? Someone is going to be gunning to take you out, and they should be, because you're actually not in right relationship in the divine order of things.
Yeah, well, it's creating a lineage of violence, and someone's going to gun to take you out, to take your place, because you're, in a way, you representing a teaching.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what we do with our lives. Our lives are our teaching. So
Yes.
if you're holding power and you're representing to others that power looks like this, and it looks like alpha aggression towards others, you're inviting this upon yourself.
That's it.
And this is foolish, right? Because it's going to create a repetitive cycle of, and who knows how long that plays out. We're in that right now in the world. This is Machiavellianism played out in the world. Freud has a very, very interesting story about this, and that it stems, I mean, he would say that if you were to try and triangulate original sin, he has a book about it, Civilization and Its Discontents, and the idea that he has is that it comes from, a primal guilt comes from patricide. It comes from sons rising up and killing their father. But the reason that the sons did this is because, and you see this sometimes in chimp communities, and you see it in lion prides, and we have this association of lions and kings, right? It's like right there. It's right there. I have it on my phone as well. It's like on my background. It's something so deep in humans, because we do feel the alpha nature of male lions, the strength of male lions, the battles that they go through to earn their rightful place as leaders. But something that happens in lion prides, and it also happens in chimp communities, and this is what Freud was writing about as a psychological remnant that humans have as a kind of existential guilt, is that fathers, strong lions or strong alphas, would destroy all of the other potential competitors, like kill them or wound them badly enough to where they had to roam the wilderness.
Yep.
They could not live within the pride. And so the only others that can live within the pride are familial lions that are in submission to the alpha nature of the one, and they become like his rangers of sorts, or his knights. But the one alpha has access to all the women. That's it. So all of the sons of the alpha do not have access to women. So the father is the one continuously sowing his genetics for multiple generations. He has multiple generations of sons, and over time, some of those sons grow strong. They come into their strength as he ages. And now there is a choice. The old lion, the old patriarch, will either fight the strongest of the sons to the death until one of them kills him, because eventually a son will overpower the old patriarch, or he will have to wander out in the wilderness and die alone and leave the pride. This is the shadow of the hierarchy. And we're still playing this out unconsciously. And so, like, how do we break this down? This is important in men's work. We need, that circle is more important than ever right now. That we come together on an even playing field, humble ourselves, learn from one another, be willing to see our shadows together, and do our own spiritual work to become better people. And we should probably leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, fuck, man. Making me question this lion business. Well, it's like the glorification of the gangster in our culture. All these gangster movies and these gangster TV shows, the glorification of this absolute mafia don, psychopath that is glorified.
Yeah.
And just how the reality of our culture reflected in the media that it produces and the heroes that it produces, and the reflection of the shadow in that glorification of these false kings, where it's just a legacy of perpetual violence and aloneness, and the disassociation that emerges as a result of that masculine shadow, that complete disassociation from self and other, the disassociation from the body. Because how can you rape and kill and pillage if you're actually in your body feeling what you're doing? You can't. And so there's a bit of that sort of penultimate Christian teaching of forgive them, Father, they know not what they do, which is true, I think, but it's time now. It's time for us to resurrect these lost traditions, this lost technology, the circle technology, because I don't know about you, brother. I mean, I actually do know about you. I'm done. I'm done with this shit, and I know you are too. And I think enough of us are. And what does that mean to stand up in that and be a stand for that and open our own doors and our own arms and our own hearts? And yeah, sheathe our swords, keep them on, maybe even keep them half sheathed in preparation, but to really be able to bring forward a bastion of brotherhood rather than a gang of unfathered children clamoring for power that is so far from actual power. It's staggering.
We have a lot to heal from. We've hurt each other a lot.
We have.
You know, we've fucking hurt each other a lot, man. There's a verse in the Old Testament, they beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks.
Yes.
Right? It's like, what do we do with metal? What do we do with metal? I'm holding a knife as we speak. It's like constantly with me, you know.
One on my hip as well.
It's constantly with me. I remember when my grandfather introduced me to blades at like age 4, you know.
Yeah.
What are you carrying?
A short blade that at least 26 other men in this world also have one of.
I think I know from what.
From one of the cohorts that I've co-led with some other epic men that I think I've already named on this podcast. So yeah, but you were saying that the metal.
What do we do?
Sharpening.
Yeah. What do we do with the metal, and not the sharpening, the reforging of tools of creative production as opposed to tools that are designed to take life. And I don't know if we're yet there where we should beat our swords into plowshares. I don't know if we're in a time where we should completely surrender our weapons. But I feel like there's an invitation to walk together towards a time where we can actually hold hands in peace.
Yeah.
And put the weapons down.
That's it.
Completely. And I don't know if we'll create the kind of peace on earth that is so available to us until we trust each other.
Well, and that means coming together in specified locations, inside of containers, inside of places with specified rules, like a men's circle, where the men can trust that these are the rules of engagement. This is what will be followed, and they're policed by the whole group.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, in the medieval in medieval literature and in the stories and in another ancient of the British Isles teaching story that I'm quite familiar with and versed in, Shakespeare's Henry V. The final act of the play, Act 5, is literally after the war, after the combat, after the miracle victory at the Battle of Agincourt, where the English, outnumbered 5-1, prevail due to seeming acts of God, but also military strategy. The men from the victorious English side and the beaten French meet inside of a garden, a circle, the medieval garden, where you would leave your weapons on the outside and then come into the circle together to parlay, to talk, to negotiate. But you would leave your weapons on the outside. And so it's beautiful, because in the story, King Henry V, who is a martial genius, is incredibly bad at courting women and these other things, right? He's such a specialist at war that his inabilities in the other arenas are shown. And so I think there's something in that too, of the necessity of balancing ourselves as men from just pure bellicose peddlers of warmongering steel to, yes, the farmers and plowshare carriers that we can also be. But yes, I think it is too early to melt our weapons down, but to rather learn how to use them correctly, and less against each other and ourselves, but rather against something, whatever it is that is pushing us towards those disintegrated forms of masculine meeting.
I remember sitting with my teacher, Iron Eagle, one time, and there was some point in my journey where I was like, I got to get rid of my guns that were given to me by my grandfather. Yeah, I have a couple of .357 Magnum revolvers that were gifted to me by my grandfather, really by my grandmother when he passed. And I have a rifle that was gifted by my dad's father. I only own firearms that were owned by my grandfathers. And I was saying to my teacher, Iron Eagle, I think I need to clear myself of firearms. And he just said, keep the guns. They're symbols of your ancestors' life. And it really hit me in the heart. It really hit me in the heart. And so it's like, in a sense, you can keep them as heirlooms. Yes, they're still weapons. They still fire. I fire them once a year at a range. But it really does feel like connection to ancestral and the ancestral line. And I think that when I really bring all of this into the heart of what I believe it means to embody, that is the shamanism that we're working with in this time, and why the shamanism is so vital. I actually genuinely, at the heart of me, believe shamanism is an art of war. It is something that wouldn't exist if we didn't fight each other. So it is a warrior art. It is the art of powering ourselves up. And we probably would not need to do that if we did not live in a world with violence. And yet we do live in a world with violence. And this is part of the natural order in which we're part of. So what does it mean to embody that way of training and that way of vision and understanding, but to, again, keep peace? And to be peaceful, to be a peaceful person, to lead with negotiation and to lead with diplomacy and to lead with humility in the face of others who are angry and upset and beating their chest, or who feel they have been wronged by you.
Yeah.
There is something to training these warrior arts that keep our swords sharp. Yes. And that keep our aim true without putting bullets in the chamber, or without unsheathing the blade, but using it to sharpen our spiritual attunement and how we treat other people with respect.
It brings to mind a mistranslation from the Bible that I actually heard Jordan Peterson talk about, where that trope, or just that phrase, that common turn of phrase, the meek shall inherit the earth, is actually a mistranslation. That what it actually references is that those who have swords and keep them sheathed shall inherit the earth. Those who have swords know how to use them, but choose in the moment to the path of discernment, the path of patience, the path of forgiveness, can go to war if necessary, but can keep them sheathed. I mean, that's what a beautiful thing, and what a beautiful thing the shamanistic arts are as a pivot point. I've never thought of it that way, as a tangential sort of feeder into the warrior, or the warrior feeding into that particular archetype. What a true thing. I've heard you talk about some of the jungle stories from your teachers down in the Amazon, and the shamanic warfare that goes on down there in those realms. And maybe this is a good transition point to get into the second piece that we wanted to talk about, the turning of the weapons into plowshares and these different technologies that exist in that particular arena. And we have another point of carryover between the two of us, this sort of tantric universe, and something that you're unfolding, this tantra of plants, in the work that you do with the North American teacher trees that you sit with that I've joined you in sitting with, and also with the Amazonian tobacco that you carry and these other pieces. And I'll let you speak to that, but I think just my own feed into tantra here, I was last weekend co-led at the Austin Tantra Festival here in town, and sort of a world that I grew up in, and there's always a bit of an eye roll that I have in the tantra community, because it is so open in some ways. And the question I always love to ask at tantra festivals or tantra things is, what is tantra? Who actually knows what it is or what it means? The word itself is Sanskrit and is an allusion to weaving, to the art and act of weaving on a loom. As one of my teachers, Justin Patrick Pierce, and his partner London Angel Winters talk a lot about this idea that I love too, that I've sort of been fleshing out, of the weaving back together of the sacred and the sexual. The shamanic weaving of those two things back together that have been divorced in our culture. And the principal tool of that tantric tradition being this tool of polarity, and this understanding of this idea of polarity and what it means. And it's funny, I get labeled as a polarity coach a lot, and often pedantically. Well, it's interesting because it's become such an interesting thing, and in our culture where we have difficulty agreeing on what a man is or what a woman is, and masculine and feminine, and how the necessary amorphousness, I think, or this, the reimagining of a lot of these ideas, and what that has created in the culture, for better and for worse, that polarity in and of itself being the power of opposites, and that polarity exists independent of gender. And so it doesn't matter what body you're in or who you're attracted to. Polarity works or it doesn't work. I always think of it as math. It's just algebra. Like, you're attracted or you're not. And in these last 60 or 70 years of saming that we've been doing on the back end of feminism and the necessary equalizing of a lot of things, but how that has depolarized our culture. The more men have become feminine in their nature and their necessary exploration of their sensitive, vulnerable sides, and women have become more masculine, and out in the world it's like we have more same. We have less people fucking, more divorces. The results of that are clear in the culture, but the necessary skill set of what it means to be able to generate polarity in the intentional creation of differences, building out the extremities of masculine and feminine energy, whatever that means, right? In the tantric world, the Shiva and the Shakti energies, what does it mean to play in the extremity of that? And in the extremity of that, we learn and get to feel the polarity, the pull of opposites, while seeking to penetrate our own conditioning to determine our own native essence, as David Data calls it, your native essence of where you actually reside in the realm of these energies. And so I'm fascinated to talk with you about how you're working this through plants and what's lining up there with you. And again, before I hop off, just and pass it to you, just a shout out to my co-conspirator Amy Batuski at the Austin Tantra Festival last week, December 7th, when we taught together. Batuski, it's always fun to teach with you and lead with you. So yeah, Jordan, how's this lining up for you?
Yeah, man, I think my attraction to even the word Tantra, and I have no traditional training in Tantra whatsoever, but I feel the deep, deep resonance with the loom and the wisdom of weaving. And to me, this is my connection to the term Tantra. And I think what it translates into is like a praxis or sacred practice, right? To weave many threads together into a tapestry, right? The wisdom of the whole. And so it's quite nebulous what tantras can be, but it doesn't really, I think, again, one might say it's like weaving sacred sexuality back with the wisdom of practice, but it doesn't have to be about sexuality per se either, right? It's about weaving all of the threads of the human being back into spiritual practice. Yeah. And I think but when we talk about the human being, we're talking about men and women. And when we talk about men and women, we're talking about sex. Yeah. And, this is what prolongs life. This is what lineages are born from. And what lineages come from, in my understanding, is long, well-kept tantras over time, right? People who weave the wisdom and the beauty into knowledge, tradition, and ways of life that can be emulated, and passed and refined. And we are living in a time where we're picking up tapestries that are frayed, that are heavily knotted, that have been abandoned, that have massive holes in them. And it's really no shocker that we're going back to these traditional mythic maps of our culture to try to rediscover the wisdom, because in reality, our tantras have been abandoned, and it's causing quite a disarray. I mean, I think the Swedish people are in rapid population decline. The South Korean people are basically like, if we don't start having children, this generation will be done in 100 years. Wow. And you think in 100 years, there might not be a South Korean people. And that's the kind of time that we're living in. Like, it could be races of people could die out. So how do we create peace together with men and women seems to be a pretty vital question for our time. And I think what I heard you speaking to is we have to find that peace in our own inner union first, in order to be able to meet each other. So what does it mean for a man to find peace with his feminine essence, with his vulnerability, with his softness, with his emotions, like his emotions being his unpredictability or his changeableness, his his chaos, right? These even darker sides of it, his uncertainty, and his tenderness, his love, right? Like these sides of being a man. And I think for women, how does a woman balance her truth and her righteousness and her pure witness, her pure consciousness, this masculine pole of presence that so many men are threatened by when women bring truth and witness and presence. So many men crumble into little babies. And it's like it's evidence of where we're at in the culture and the training that we haven't received, and that we need to come back into this. Men need to do this work with men, women need to do this work with women, but it's probably, and as you're participating in, we are now starting to form circles to do this work together with people who have been training in these separate spaces, all male spaces, all female spaces, and starting to weave the communities together. And it's pretty beautiful.
What it means to do that, to restore the king and the queen to their right and exalted place, and what that actually means. There's a wonderful book by Alison Armstrong called The Queen's Code. And she has another one, Keys of the Kingdom, that I think speaks to the opportunity for women to actually learn how to speak to men if you actually want an empowered man in your life versus a disempowered, emasculated, castrated, second-guessing man that so many of us have become. And I was sort of unintentionally but raised to sort of become in that sense of things. And so how can we do that? How do we come back together? And on the other side of things too, for men, how to really understand how to hold our own, set against, with a woman when she's in her turbulence, in her pursuit of relative truth versus absolute truth, which feels like the different orientations to truth itself, from masculine to feminine, the truth of her experience that changes moment to moment, that can be so infuriating and maddening for a man or for the masculine. Our pursuit of the absolute truth, of what actually happened. I don't care about how you feel. What actually happened? This is what actually happened. No, you need to really get to the nitty gritty of the thing, versus being able to hold her in, this hurt my feelings. I'm not okay. Can you just be with me where I am, and we'll have a chance to negotiate the X's and Y's of what actually happened there. So yeah, I think it's, at its heart, it's very simple. Relative truth versus absolute truth, that seems to be representative of the way, or a more feminine view of truth versus a masculine view of truth, the relativism of truth that can change moment to moment, because the feminine orients more towards the real-time experience that changes, and the masculine pursuit of absolute truth, a truth that doesn't change, that is a paragon of excellence that we can rely on, will remain the same day after day, so that we can orient ourselves in the world to something steadfast and reliable. Both are true, and both can be true. And how do we as men, how are we able to meet our women, or a being in a feminine experience that is oriented towards the relative truth of, I'm not okay right now, and I just need you to be with me and listen to me and hear me, rather than trying to get me to see the logic of why I'm wrong, which I imagine is pretty darn infuriating for anyone in that particular experience. And so again, the simplicity of these techniques, again, I'm always flabbergasted by, and I've been writing quite a bit about this lately, that all the money we invest in relationships, in our clothes, even in these big weddings that we have, we never spend any time or money or education on how to be in right relationship. We never learn how to be in relationship to one another. We are not taught anything in school about how to relate, how to have an argument, how to have a good conversation. What is a conscious conversation? What are the tools of that? What are the techniques of that? How do you fight well with your partner, because if you win an argument with your partner, how do you not lose if that's your partner? You're now with someone who's crestfallen or been made wrong, and you're attached to that person in partnership. So it just, logically speaking, right, it's such an interesting thing here.
Well, coming back to the vision of the loom, you have the warp and the weft. You have these two directionalities of threads. There's threads going vertically and there's threads going horizontally. And essentially the threads have to be knotted. And that means they're going to bend and make contact. And so when these two directions of threads meet, there's going to be friction, what we might translate as conflict in kind of our own experience between men and women, abrasion, contact. It doesn't have to translate as negative, but there's going to be some sort of encounter that's going to require us to let go into the dance, where you're in full presence, you're in somewhat of the unknown, and you have to let go in order to actually get through the encounter. And depending on the depth of your tantra and the style of relating that you have and the person that you're with, these could be very intense, or they could be very gentle, and they could be relatively sparse, or they could be every couple of hours. Yeah. And I feel like the more we do our own inner work within ourselves, we're able to show up to a relationship where we have these moments of contact and the known is suspended, and all we can rely on is presence, because we're essentially in the unknown with the other person.
Right.
And usually these moments of contact will involve some kind of nervous system activation. Somebody or both of us will be activated in these various ways. You will either be activated very strongly, which could bring up your traumas and could bring up your fears and could bring up the things you might struggle with in life. And sometimes it's bringing it up for both people. And usually one triggers the other and vice versa. So I feel like it comes back down to someone having done enough of the Tantra within themselves to have the wisdom and wherewithal to regulate their nervous system and stay calm and straight and clear and present when someone else is triggered and going through this moment of contact. And then when you come through that, and if you come through that successfully, you make a beautiful knot in the tapestry.
Yes.
You go, oh, that is leading to a beautiful tapestry. You have successfully completed a beautiful knot. And it's like a spiral. It's a spiral dynamic that happens between the two. And otherwise, what you end up doing is creating a web of difficult or knots that are not in alignment with the tapestry, and you end up making this weave that is a nest of fibers and cords and fabrics, and it is not beautiful. It becomes painful to unbind. And in this, we learn the art of weaving sometimes. Yes. We need to go through a lot of this to learn how delicate the art of weaving together is. But we can also do this work within ourselves, right? And I think that's like the great analogy is braiding our masculine and our feminine energies within ourselves to become balanced people.
I love the way you spoke to that. I hadn't really thought of it in that way, in the sense of that weaving and what it means. You know, I just recently had a conversation with someone where there was a missing of a mark, let's say, and I received a communication that really didn't feel good. Someone got offended or upset by something and came at me with a very one-sided blaming thing, and I immediately, my nervous system went to defend the position that I've held since I was a kid of, oh gosh, I'm bad and wrong. I'm not bad, and how do I not be bad and wrong? I now start backpedaling and trying to defend myself, thus demonstrating to this person that I must be bad and wrong, because why am I defending myself? And so this dance of like catching myself before I sent back the arrow of attack because I'd received an attack or what felt like an attack, and being able to catch it, sleep on it, come back the next day off my cushion and give a completely different response, an invitation into a deeper conversation here. There's clearly something here. I clearly didn't set you up for success. How can I hold my responsibility in this if you're open to a conversation? And we had a beautiful meeting, and we're able to really get to the bottom of that, and leaving each other truly served with a beautiful weave, a beautiful knot, a beautiful tie of something very special. Felt very special.
These are bonds.
Yeah.
Right? It's creating bonds.
Yes.
And that's what, getting into like the depth of safety and trust. I mean, this is what builds safety, trust, community, the fibers that allow us to make peace.
That's really it, man. And from that place of peace and safety, the body, the mind, the heart, the spirit, the sex truly opens. And again, I think because very few of us have had any models around any of this for what's actually possible, so much opens up when we're able to actually see and experience a different version than we grew up with, or a different way of being with each other, that there's a way to weave here. I don't just when you shoot at me, I don't just shoot back at you. When you throw a grenade at me, I don't just pull one off my own belt, take the pin out and throw it back. It's like, but that requires the individual work to stabilize the nervous system and be able to engage with our own inner tantra of balancing the disparate aspects of ourself. And this feels like a good segue into the tantra of plants, utilizing tools, external tools in our natural environment to aid in our ability to stabilize our own nervous systems, do our own work, because codependence, as I understand it at this point in my journey into its depths, is trying to control others or be in control of others to protect oneself or to get them to do what you want to do indirectly. And when you're able to articulate cleanly and clearly, it's a very different story. And when you're able to take responsibility for the only one that you can control, which is only ever you, I have been able to affect change in someone else because I've been able to show up to the moment and not get activated, not get drawn into something. Not that I'm disassociating from their experience or pushing them away, but I'm actually very connected to them, but just not pulled in to that aspect. And this past year, I would say unequivocally, I've had the most progress in my ability to do that, the ability to land in my own nervous system, watch my own triggers, map my own, be a cartographer of my own territory of landmines and weaponry, and start to really heal in a way that is permanent. And using some of these technologies that I know you are an expert in the teaching and dissemination of. I'm super curious to just hear a bit from you on that and how these tools, I'll speak to my own experience with it and with you as well, but just, the tantra of these plant teachers that you work with so closely.
Yeah, man. I think the way that seems most simple is to speak of like what we're made of as ancestry, and we have mothers and fathers. We have a mother and a father, and then we have grandmothers and grandfathers. And this is the chain of life before us. And so the way that I serve the plants is I work with 4 plants, tobacco being the grandfather. It's an incredibly traditional attribution of tobacco as a grandfather energy, connecting to the divine masculine, but through ancestry. So looking back in time, I work with the oak as the father, the very traditional attribution of the oak as the sky father, like a Yahweh or a Thor or a Varuna or a Zeus. All of these gods are considered to live in the oak. Like so many cultures around the world view the oak as the altar of the sky father. And so, at this point, I feel comfortable just saying, the thing of all these northern hemisphere lightning sky gods, that's humans interacting with the oak tree for a million years plus. It's father energy. And then you get into, I work with the white birch, and it's the same deal, but with the mother. So the Norse rune for the great mother is Berkana, the birch. It's the same in the Druidic, the Agam, Druidic Agam. They attribute the great mother to the rune for birch. So the Mongolian shamans, the Siberian shamans, it's the same thing. The great mother is the white birch, and that is their world tree. And this is the region from which the term shaman disperses and is considered to be one of the potential root places of human origination, like the Siberian Altaic plain. This is definitely the origination of the Apache, Navajo, Hopi people. It's a very deep web. So you've got grandfather, father, mother, tobacco, birch, and then the sequoia, the grandmother. This one is the one we know least about because the sequoias are predominantly, in the western United States, and we're native, and there's nothing written about them, obviously. But the family of the sequoia is the cypress, and we know many things about the cypress from around the world. So the Druids worked with the cypress called the yew tree, and the yew tree is the grandmother tree. That's their world tree. So the Druids would work with this same pantheon: the cypress, the yew tree, which is the sequoia, the birch as the mother, and the oak as the father. And then their grandfather would be the lineage or the tradition. So the lineage of initiation is the grandfather energy. So when we think about the inner tantra, I think what we're talking about, it's in some sense is ancestral weaving or ancestral healing, and what it means to start working with these energies that we embody from our incarnation, from being born, from the way that the weaving of people creates life, the way that weaving of male body and female body creates life. And so to give an example of what that might play out as, we have the tobacco. We have a tobacco diet coming up. And I've called it inner union as an homage or an ode to what we're speaking about. And so the way I describe it is has a very different effect on the female body as on the male body, and this comes down to physiology. But when a woman or a female body ingests 3 months worth of tobacco paste into the stomach, you eat a tobacco paste every day, you're getting a very stable infusion of very strong and seemingly aged or mature masculine energy. So it's not immediately sexual, but it's working with this infusion of very stable masculine energy in a way that allows the female body to actually relax.
Yeah.
Relax the nervous system into a kind of safety because the masculine is being held through the tobacco. And internally, she can relax back into her feminine and into her creative essence. And I've witnessed it with females doing the tobacco diet, the tobacco holding the masculine internally so that she can just, relax back into, her creativity. And she has to rise to meet it as well, because when we take the tobacco, it's done in a daily sit of 40 minutes. So there is a kind of structure and discipline that has to be kept up. So she's also practicing this, and in a way, she's embodying it for herself.
Yeah.
The tobacco acts as that guide and that teaching. And for man, I wouldn't say it's opposite, it's tangential in a way, but the tobacco tends to activate and sharpen the masculine in a man. So you get the stable infusion of masculine energy, and what it does is it bolsters almost the testosterone circuit in a man, but it also rounds it out. So it helps a man become less jagged. His approach to masculinity. So it matures his masculinity so that he can show up with more grace, so that he can show up with more flexibility while staying true and in the clarity of his polarity, but flexible and easeful. And there's a nobility in that, coming back to kingship and the return of the king. And these are all inner tantras, right? These are, you hold your sexual energy inside your body for 3 months, you don't ejaculate, you don't self-pleasure. We're working with an internal technique to stimulate the sexual chi inside the body. So we move energy every day in our daily sit, in our practice. But there's this, this element of working with this dialectic with a plant inside your system in order to strengthen one's personal sovereignty and awareness of how we weave our own energy.
Yeah, man. It's powerful work. I mean, I can attest to it firsthand. There's been so many upgrades over the course of the last year that I've experienced that I can directly correlate to the work I've done with both tobacco and with the white birch, with the grandmother tree.
Mother tree.
Mother tree, excuse me. Yeah, with the mother tree. And yeah, even the beautiful reconnection and healing that just happened over Thanksgiving with my own mother in such a beautiful way that continues. And so, yeah, these teachers, these ancient guardians of humanity, as I see them. I mean, every human being has nicotine receptors in the body. You know, it's what is that all about? Like, there are access pathways that these tools get to step into and work with. And I think in this sort of era of the hyper acceleration of psychedelia and the, for better and for worse, that there's something to this specific work that you hold that A, is perfectly legal, because all of the substances you work with are perfectly legal. There isn't a psychedelic or even psychotropic impact, and there is a major impact. I mean, as you know well, the experiences I had on a 7-day fast with that wonderful tobacco tincture you made for me with mapacho and garlic to clear the mold poisoning out of my sinuses, that after 4 years of working with different antibiotic nasal sprays and all this different shit that fucked up my gut and everything else, the tobacco and garlic cleared. There's something to these medicines. And there's also something to the technology of doing them in the group. And so, yeah, the tobacco program that you do, again, I highly, highly recommend to anyone listening and considering a journey in that particular realm. You hold a beautiful space, brother, and deep appreciation to your role in my own healing and what I've been able to bring forward this year. So grateful to have you here with us and in this work. So any final pieces that you want to add as we wrap up here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this framework that I'm speaking to is a very old and traditional way of looking at things in many call it traditional or shamanic cultures, and we may have generalized it or tried to universalize it in our time, which is one of the tendencies of the West, and also one of the strengths of the West, is to try to take the best of what we see in a pattern and generalize it. It's what we do with AI, right? Yeah. It's part of the Western mindset of rationalism. But there is something to viewing spiritual progression, our own inner spiritual progress, through the lens of a traditional masculine-feminine dance and a masculine-feminine tantra, and to not abandon that when doing any work that is considered to be spiritual. Yes. So it's worthy to consider these things when we approach any plant medicine experience or when we approach any kind of spiritual container. And it's a balance. We can take it too far. You know, we were speaking a little bit to this at the start of the conversation around how to interpret the mythic maps used by the men's community and the menswear communities right now. And if you take it too literally, you're going to get into a pigeonhole, and it's going to get very rigid, and it won't flow, right? So there's a way of holding these things with grace and delicacy and lightness. And then also, I think part of what we're trying to do in the collective right now, and certainly what I would count myself as part of, is trying to weave it back into how we conduct ceremony and how we hold our rituals. And I say ritual, and what I mean is just how we structure things so that it reflects the best of this this philosophy of looking at things as a dynamic between the masculine and the feminine inside of ourselves and also within men and women. It's a collective learning process, and I think we need to have grace with one another and with ourselves in that. And it's also a really beautiful movement that I think is opening. And for those who feel inspired by it, yeah, the invitation to come participate in any of these communities that are weaving this wisdom back into the present, please come. Please come, please go to others that are doing good work and participate. Wisdom comes through everyone, and we only recreate lineage communally. It's not something that I can do. It's not something that Michael can do. Yeah. It's something we can do collectively, or not at all.
I love that, man. We only weave this back together communally. That's it. It's that technology of tribe that we're all missing. To me, that feels like the thing under the thing under the thing. The tribal piece that we're all missing. That togetherness that forms the meta web around all of us, that holds all of us, that we once had. And again, having not experienced it for most of us in the West, don't know what's missing. And so, yeah, from that place, how do we come back together? And there are some options, for you guys listening. We're recording this on December 12th, 2024. I will be co-facilitating an experience here in Austin, Texas called Sacred Union, January 17th through the 19th. It's a 3-day full-on immersion, a residential retreat here in Austin, where we really explore the nitty-gritty of what it means to come back together as sacred man and woman. The first day we separate. The men go separate, and the men and the women go separate, and we re-presence ourselves to the technology of what it means to be men and women again, and then come back together and work in the space. It's going to be a beautiful experience, and I'm so grateful for my co-conspirators, Rob Montgomery, Ellie Montgomery, Amy Batuski, Mark Boughton, holding this frame. And then again, we'll be doing our second iteration of the King's Code, the men's initiatory group program that Mark and Rob and I run here in Austin, that takes place online, but with in-person retreat, and is very much about, well, it's called the King's Code. It's how it's resurrecting, or the work to bring back into the world the orientation with that divine masculine, with that kingly element in every man that absolutely exists, and that none of us were taught how to bring online. No one taught our fathers. It's not our fault that we don't have these skills and capacities, and it is our responsibility to take up the path of determining these things for ourselves. And I think that this is the great work of our generation, is to reconstitute these things that were taken when all of our lineages were broken. When the Romans came through and murdered the Druids 2,000 years ago and wiped out so much of the shamanic traditions of my and your ancestry. We have so many modern ones closer to so many cultures, but it's important to remember that all of our lines have been broken. All of us have been enslaved. All of us have become trapped in the myopic, limited frameworks of our culture. And there's also a lot to celebrate and protect and honor in our culture as well. So can we hold both? Can we hold what is good and true and already here, while being in the process of reclaiming and accelerating ourselves and each other through the group experience, through the collective, the accelerator, the Vajrayana, that is that Tibetan tantric Buddhist idea of the two-bodied practice, the mirror in front of you of the other that can help you see the things you just can't see in yourself so much faster. And so, yeah, coming back to that circle of men, the return of the king, the return of Tantra, what it means to weave together. What a beautiful place to conclude. And thank you again, brother, for all that you bring in this work. I really do see you as a pillar in both of these fields. And so blessings be upon you and your path. And I'm excited for people to be able to work with you at this stage in your career where you're still accessible. And for those of you who don't know Jordan, I heard you say it, by next year, the new album, Jordan is one of the most exceptional musicians I've come across in a very long time, and plays a type of music, a type of prayer that is truly a transmission to be around, true sacred ceremonial music. So many so many skills and talents that you bring online, Jordan, and just a real pleasure to have you for everyone listening. Yeah, if you want to find Jordan's work, it is www.treediets.com is the best place to find his work and have a conversation with him. While again, yeah, I know this work is going to proliferate for you. I have no doubt about it. I intend on being a part of it proliferating because I really do believe in it. And anyone interested in the work that I've mentioned, you can find my website, mikaalbates.com, spelled uniquely like my hippie mom made it, Mikaal, B as in boy, ATES, thekingscode.org, and sacredunion.live, L-I-V-E, sacredunion.live. Anything else to add, brother, as we wrap here?
Yeah, man, it's a pleasure to also just continue to weave with you, dude, and to grow together collectively. It's inspiring, and sometimes I look around at my life and what has grown, and I can't really fathom it.
Yeah.
It's just been such a gift from the Spirit. So more getting out of the way,
yeah,
and leaning back into deeper trust of one another, as a tribe, as community, as brothers and sisters on the path. And I'm really excited for what births next year communally.
Yeah, me too.
And yeah, that's my deepest personal excitement, is what the community is going to create.
There's so much coming down the pipe in 2025, man. It's going to be an exquisite year. And just so glad to be in it with you. And to everyone listening, this is not just our party. This party is about you. And we need you in this fight. We need you in this dance. We need you in this with us. And so my prayer for you, whoever you are listening to this, is that something in this moves you, and something in this presences you to your own path and your own place in this world. And that 2025 is truly a meteoric year for you as well. And that there is so much goodness in you. There is so much potential that is ready to be born, because it's happening. It's happening in the collective. It's all of us coming through. The people of this planet are waking up, and you're one of them. And you listening to this right here, hearing these words in this moment, tells me that you're already on that path. That path is already open. So how can you do your own work, take responsibility for yourself, so you can open your own family, your own communities, your own relationship, your own lineage, and be a part of that healing that we all need so much, so that I can be healed by your presence, so that your broadcast can be so exquisitely felt that it serves everyone else in every room you step foot in. So that's the future that I'm holding for you, brother, sister, whoever it is that's listening to this. May you truly awake and arise into your kingdom and queendom, as we ourselves humbly do the fucking work ourselves that we invite others into. So given how much I know you and I have both gotten our asses kicked lately and over the course of our life, in the immortal words of Krishnamurti, that which can burn, let it burn. For you, for me, brother, and for everyone listening, because there's something really beautiful underneath that is being revealed, and may it be revealed for all of us in the name of all humanity.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you. We'll see you guys on the next episode. Thank you for listening. Blessings to you and yours.